Welcome to the workshop, No Sun, No Problem, Made in the Shade, presented by the Nevada County Master Gardeners, Allison Chop and Susan Van Steenkist. Here are our presenters.
My name is Allison Chop. I'm delighted to be here with my partner, Susan Van Steenkist, to talk about a really popular subject, which is how to grow plants in shade. So I know that with the pandemic, that many of you have started vegetable gardens, and now you're ready to conquer your garden, your yard. And so we will be offering some great landscaping tips as well as some plant choices. So what will we discuss today? We'll talk about plants and why they need light, how they have adapted to shade conditions, the different kinds of shade that are out there, and other considerations, including irrigation, microclimates, and deer. For the next 15 minutes or so, I will be talking specifically about designing your landscape and how to get that moving along. Susan will follow with some really great plant choices. We will be providing a one-page resource list that will be posted online after the presentation. So always want to start off with a beautiful picture. This particular setting has many rhododendrons and some garden sculptures, some ferns. It's just a beautiful, beautiful spot that you could probably sit and look at for hours. So what is shade? Shade is a condition of light, sunlight, and it can be characterized as complete shade, dense shade, low light, filtered shade. Wet or dry shade is specific to the soil, and shade changes with the seasons. Shade can also be provided by nearby structures such as a wood fence, trees, canopy from trees. And when we talk about canopies, sometimes the leaves will fall in the winter time, and so will create some wonderful light, and then it'll darken up when the spring comes. Light is very, very important for plants. It's required for them to sustain their life by producing their own food. And so plants cannot survive in no light. They will tell you very quickly that they're very unhappy when they start to grow very tall and spindly and pale. But plants obviously need light to manufacture their own food, and they provide us with oxygen. So what are some of the common shade plant attributes? By that, and this is a beautiful picture of a Japanese Aurelia, and you could see how beautiful this particular leaf pattern is. It's a wonderful, wonderful plant to plant in a pot or in your garden. So shade plants are characterized with extremely thin, large leaves. If they have flowers, they're very inconspicuous. There are a few plants that we have that we'll show you later that have wonderful flowers, but they don't, they come early, come very, very early in the season. Typically, shade plants are variegated, which is a combination of green and white or green and yellow. And they typically, if they're an annual or perennial, have quite a quick growing season. They don't last month after month after month. They'll go dormant fairly quickly. And most plants love water. So they really need irrigation. So today we'll be talking about two functions of design and landscaping, and specifically how to plant a garden and a little bit about irrigation. So I'm a proponent of doing almost everything myself because I want to save what dollars that I have allocated to buy plants. Plants are not inexpensive, so I will tend to do as much as I can by myself. And master gardeners are really kind of here to help you set up your drip irrigation and build your garden beds and decide what kind of soil to put in your beds and things like that. But you can also hire a contractor that can implement your plan very easily. Most importantly, you have to do your research. You have to find those plants that will survive in your particular spot. Our motto is always plant the right plant in the right place. A little bit about climate. Climate's so important here in the foothills. I thought I was a pretty good gardener when I moved up here, and that I had 2 green thumbs and 8 green fingers. This area has set me back a little bit, and I laugh about that because I didn't realize how hot it would be or how cold it would be, and that I had a lot of deer in my area. So I have made a lot of mistakes, but you'll make mistakes too, and gardeners, what they do is when they make a mistake, they move on, they take the plant out and they put something else in. So I don't want you to worry about, making errors, because that's going to happen. One of the most important things is to know your zone. USDA zone 9 for me here in South County. And basically our winter lows are kind of average around 25 degrees in my area. So I have to find plants that can survive a little bit of a sustained chill, and also plants that can also survive in our heat as well. California is in the Mediterranean climate zone, which is characterized by cool and wet winters and hot and very dry summers. As you know, we haven't had any rain that I can think of in months. So we're waiting for our winter, and hopefully it'll bring rain soon. We have to think a little bit about our soil. Typically in the foothills, very, very rocky, very full of clay, and very, very difficult to work with. So this is the prime time to start looking at plants, getting your plan together, because after the first couple rains that we have here in the next month or so, your soil will be softened enough to work. And lastly, you got to know your plants. Susan's going to be going over a lot of the plant choices today, and we hope that you'll jot some of those down. So the most important thing about setting up a landscape is to really ask yourselves some really important questions. You got to get your family together. That includes your children if you have any. You have to say, what do you want to do with this area? Do you want to put a barbecue in? Do you need a pergola? Do you want to put a water feature? What are some of the problem areas? Do we have a couple trees that need to be removed to add a little bit more light to the area? What is our budget? Frankly, money is very important, and you want to make sure that you have enough to get a good start. But I also want to encourage you to use your area as something that you can layer on, that year after year you can add additional things if you don't have all the money up front. What are some of your passions? Are you into natives? Are you into vegetables? For me, I'm very, very stylistic. I love Asian influences, obviously, but I try to incorporate all of that into my garden choices. So gather your information by looking at your resources. Again, we will provide you with a nice one-page list of our favorite choices. You have to think about irrigation. Do you have water? Can you install a very simple drip irrigation system that can get water to that area by just turning on the hose a couple times a week? Do you want to put any pavers or any kind of structures out there to make the area nicer? Those are some questions you want to ask. A little bit again about drip irrigation. I find it extremely efficient. In fact, 100% of my garden, my entire yard is on drip irrigation. And I spent probably 6 months looking at it, thinking about it, deciding where to put my half-inch lines, how to get it automated, all those things. And I did that before I planted my plants. So a little bit about irrigation. There's drip irrigation, and I have to say the technology in drip irrigation is amazing these days. You can find drip irrigation in all forms, including my favorite, which is inline tubing. It can clog. I've cut a few lines accidentally when I've been pruning, so you have to kind of watch it, but very easy to repair. So I love it. Soaker hoses work well, especially around large trees. Sprinklers can be, if you have them, use them. If you don't have them, they're kind of expensive to put in, and they're difficult to control. And lastly, hand watering, probably everybody's favorite, because you can have a hose in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. We talk a little bit about water features, because water features are nice in shade gardens. You know, a babbling brook, just the sound of water in shade gardens is so nice. But you don't have to build a koi pond. You can put in bird baths. You can do a recirculating pump with a little waterfall. There's a lot of options out there. So depending on your budget, you can. I encourage you to incorporate a water feature into your shade garden. So a little bit about design concepts, and these are things that are designers think about these kind of things, but it's the rule of odd numbers. So you want to make sure that you plant in multiples of threes, 3, 5, 7, 9, that kind of thing, unless you have a specimen plant and you only want one of those. A garden full of one-offs is very odd looking. You want to repeat, so you'll want to find your foundation plants, and you want to buy 3 or 5 of them so that you'll have some repetition. You want to layer. By layer, you want to have small, medium, and large, and let your eye go through those levels. Massing is nothing more than a bunch of plants, all the same, and it creates quite a unified look. Contrast in shade gardens, I find it fascinating that you can use the color green and find different shades of green and gray that really is quite stunning. And there's many shade plants that have just fabulous colors and function. So possibly a Japanese maple or something that provides that great look. Here's a picture that we found here of an Asian garden. It has a little pond area in the front, but you'll see that there's repetition. There's small, medium to large. There's a focal point, which is in the back there with that Japanese maple and that beautiful pink flowered bush. We have some repeating elements here that are just beautiful. Lastly, we'll talk now about selecting plants. Please be sure to read the entire label. It'll tell you if the plant will survive in full shade, and it goes all the way to full sun. You want to choose wisely and ask your nurseryman and your experts that are working at the nursery to get their options and their choices. And you want to look in your own planting area and note your sun patterns. There's going to be some areas of your shade garden that get more light than others. So you'll want to put the plants that need a little bit more light into those planting areas. And when we say planting areas change, they do change throughout the day as well as through the seasons. One of the things that I've noticed is that a plant that It can grow in full sun or part shade to full sun. It can be adapted to shadier conditions if you do it gradually. So oftentimes if you buy a plant, leave it in its pot, take it into the full sun, and then gradually move it into the shade, it will do really well. They are very adaptable. I think it's more difficult to put a shade plant and make it survive in full sun. You know, the leaves will burn instantly. So just keep that in mind. Big to small. I choose always to spend my most money on the biggest thing I can find and make that my focal point, and then sort of fill in with the rest. So sort of like potted plants, you want to have a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. So pretty simple guidelines. The water needs should be similar, and you just want to create conditions for success. Deciduous or evergreen trees, you have sheltering. Deer is very important in this area. Make sure that you have available water and that you are meeting the needs of your family. Okay. I want to introduce Susan Van Steenkist, who will go over some plant choices, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning. I'm Susan Van Steenkist. I'm working here with my colleague Allison, and I would like to reiterate and have some pictures to demonstrate the point she was making. As you can see from this picture that I have in the background, there is a functional area, a seating area. There's a little path leading up to it. You can see the massing and the layering that's apparent in this photo. This one, again, has the layering with the hostas. There's a repeat 2 or 3 different hostas, again, different color variations, same basic plant, just different cultivars. A garden object in the back, beautiful trees in the background. Again, filler, thriller, and spiller. Now, the soil preparation is important. If you're under trees, you sort of have to be careful not to damage the roots. Is it an open space? Do you need to kind of fill in, or do you have to work around tree stumps and other things? Rototilling can be very beneficial when you're initially setting up your garden. We don't recommend it as a routine seasonal activity because it disrupts the microorganisms in your soil. So use it very carefully. Some soils need amendments. Good idea to do a soil check just to see what you need. Can't emphasize the benefit of mulch enough. If you put about 3 to 4 inches of mulch, and mulch can be many different things, and we can go into that a little bit later, but it reduces your water need by between 30 to 50%, essential in this area with dry summers. Again, are you growing under oaks? Low water plants are best under oaks because oaks don't like to have their roots wet during the summer. Some shallow rooted plants will work better, but you still have to consider this. The oak leaves are really great for the mulch and also to add to your microfiber and microflora. It will provide filtered shade. Frequently you lose the leaves during the winter in some species, and so you have different light conditions there. If you have oaks, you're probably out in an open area where you have deer. Well, that can be a problem, so you need to carefully consider that. There is a reference I have on the bottom about landscaping under oaks. Now, again, this picture has azaleas, rhododendrons. They do need a little bit more water, so you have to be careful your water. They don't have one of my favorites are Sarcocoa and Daphne, because they, Sarcococas are a little bit hard to find, but it's a dark green, does well with very little water, tolerates deep shade, very useful plant for many different light environments. Daphnes come in some variegated forms now. They're the ones that smell so nice in the spring. But as I learned recently with the help of my friend Allison, when you plant a Daphne, be sure that's where you want it. They don't like moving. They don't like change. They grow where they're planted indeed. So be careful about that one or you'll lose it completely. Many varieties of ferns with different water needs, light exposures, deer tolerance, and so forth can be useful in your landscaping. Ribes is one of our native species that can be useful in shade irrigations, but also with the irrigation. You need to probably provide some irrigation even under the shade trees. Again, I emphasize the fallen leaves. Don't throw your leaves and bag them up and send them to the landfill. Put them on your plants. The trees and conifers for shade can be so many, different specimens. Some of the ones that are generally our trees or our dogwoods, they're low study plants. They grow well in the filtered light, but many will tolerate sun. Redbuds pop up everywhere. Podocarpus is a very useful plant that can be well adapted to sun or shade conditions. Hemlocks, many conifers have a dwarf feature, allowing some utilization in smaller gardens. Lots of variation, lots of choices. You don't need to be stuck with one thing. Oh boy, Japanese maples. Now I could go, I'm sorry, this is just a limited workshop because I could do a whole workshop on this one. There are endless variety of leaf colors, bark colors, growth habits, light tolerance. These are so adaptable. Now, the one consistent thing with Japanese maples is that you need to be sure that they're fairly well watered. And I mean by that, sort of consistent. They will tolerate some periods of dryness, some periods of kind of being wet, but not very well. They need to be kind of consistent. So the watering is the only thing that, really is significant with these things. They don't even need very much fertilizer. Now, this just gives you an example of some of the shade of the different leaf patterns that you'll see in the Japanese maples. And it's from this diagram, you can see the enormous variety of colors, leaf shapes, designs, so much opportunity. And again, different leaf shapes. The one on my left is a draping, cascading form called a ricin. I have 3 of them. Told you I could talk about Japanese maples for some time. The other one is one called waterfall, and it's, again, this is its fall color, but again, it's a mounding, low-growing sort of plant that works well in many landscape plants. Some shrubs that might be useful in your landscaping, of course, rhodies and azaleas are some of the ones we think of most frequently. They do need a little more water. Pieris japonica doesn't need as much. Different variation. Bamboo can be useful. It frequently needs a little bit more sun, but will grow in the shade, many varieties. You can even prune these things to make them fill out a little bit. I would advise people to keep them in containers, though. I don't care whether it says clumping or running. I wouldn't trust them. Hydrangeas come in many different flower formations. These are typically low light shade plants, but I find many hydrangeas kind of need a little bit more sun, like morning sun. Useful to put them in pots and move them around till you find what works best for them. And these are some shrubs that offer you a few choices. They have camellias and gardenias. Gardenias need a little bit more humidity, a little bit tricky to grow in this Mediterranean area. As Allison alluded, gardeners make mistakes. I love gardenias. I've killed 3. But it makes good compost. The camellias, again, come in a variety of colors, flower shapes, and they tend to be evergreen and very useful additions to your garden. This is a picture of the Daphne I mentioned earlier on the left. This is a variegated Daphne. The flowers come out first thing in the spring. Delightful fragrance. It tends to stay kind of bushy, so it's very useful. The other one is a Pieris. You can see the different shapes and colors. Some other additional suggestions, Mahonia. Mahonia can come upright and also some lower growing, very tough plant. Doesn't need much water. Ilex, again, my favorite, Sarcococa and Cordalis. The one on the left is a flowering hydrangea. Believe those are climbers. They are a little slow to get going, but spectacular once they do go. The one on the left, right, is a jasmine. Jasmine, again, the wonderful odor. They tend to be tough and easy to grow. So those are excellent choices for climbers if you want something going up over a wall, up a support of any sort. Again, another suggestion for some of the lower growing plants, you see ferns, just as an example of the many different varieties of ferns. And hostas, I can't even imagine how many different varieties of hostas, but you can see the color variation and see the shapes you can get too. Those are good choices. Hostas are not deer proof. Slugs tend to like them, so you have to kind of watch that a little carefully. We do have sunflowers. We have some columbine, a stilbe. The picture we have here is a Helioboris. First thing that pops up in the spring, and I mean early spring, even late winter. It's so refreshing. That's the first thing you see when you're really, really ready for spring and tired of rain and drizzle. I'm not tired of rain yet, not yet. Epimedium, Hutra, which are coral bells, Pacific iris, Bernera, Trillium. Japanese anemones have flowers, but they tend to be a little leggy, and they can take over. So you have to watch where you plant those. The perennials for foliage, because Allison mentioned earlier that many of the shade plants really don't flower very significantly or very long. So you go to the nursery, you see this wonderful flowering plant, but remember that flower is only going to last for a few weeks. What does the foliage look like? What is its growth habit? Those are things that are going to make a difference in your landscaping. Hostas are a gardener's mainstay because of the variety of shapes and colors. Ajuga is a good ground cover. Asphodidra, or cast iron plant, not something I see very often, but very useful, particularly for dry shade and deep shade. It's a tall, strappy looking plant and very handy. There are many others. I mentioned the ferns, Pulmonaria and Brunera, which have color changes in the leaves. We do have grasses, not many. Mondo grass, be careful, can take over. Be careful where you plant it. But one of my favorites is the Japanese forest grass with its beautiful chartreuse color. Adds a nice pop of color to your deep shade. Lairope is another one too. We do have a few annuals. Again, most of the ones that I've listed, deer eat, so you have to select some carefully if you have deer. We have impatiens, begonias, both fibrous and tuberous rooted. Some of them work well in containers. New Zealand impatiens are a little bit bushier, nice color variation. Coleus, oh my goodness, they've come out with so many different coleus variations. Now you could make a whole planting of just coleus. Fuchsias are just beautiful here, but they need more moisture and more humidity, and a little bit harder to grow here. They do better along the coast where they get some fog and a little bit more mist. We even have some bulbs that will work for you. Caladiums, so many different shapes of colors of leaves. Now, caladiums are bulbs that just have the leaf color. They need a little bit more water, work a little bit better in pots. So they need some attention. Your tuberous rooted begonias, daffodils, incidentally, are deer resistant. Good point. And some of your others, your grape muscardine and your phalaria. These are pictures that I took with permission from a participant in the Seroptimus garden tour a couple of years ago who had done a marvelous job with a shady backyard in all sorts of different shades. And we just took picture after picture because there's so many things to demonstrate. On the left, you can see some ajuga. There's a basin with some, a planter with some flowers just for a pop of color. On the right-hand side, she has the Japanese maiden grass or forest grass. Lamium is a good ground cover. It has many different variations, covers quickly, and that's its advantage and its disadvantage. So again, it has to be pruned, but it's not hard to control. You can see the tall iris in the back. You can see the filler with the Japanese forest grass. So again, Allison's principles of spiller, filler, and thriller are well represented in this picture. Ground cover. We haven't talked too much about ground cover, but this lady had so many different types of ground cover. There's sweet woodruff on the left and baby's tears on the right. The sweet woodruff goes a little taller, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 inches. Baby's tears are very low growing, depending on what you want. Yerba buena is another attractive plant, a little hard to find. It's very sprawling, smells, of course, like mint. Deer don't eat this one and does well in dry shade, very useful. And I've listed some of the other ones for your consideration, and they will be listed down on our handouts. There's a strip of grass, which I think this got morning sun, which helped the grass grow. There's a Japanese maple in the middle, and then the Lamium in the front. Again, look at the wonderful leaf textures and lighting there. And you can see the different lighting filters she has there. She has a rhodea in the back and it is blooming right now, but it makes a nice thriller. And then she has all the other elements there represented with different color variations in the leaves. Succulents can work for many people. Succulents don't need as much water. Most of them don't like direct sun. They like a little bit of protection from the sun. Many different kinds of succulents. You can do so much with those. They're good ground cover, many of them options. Some of them are very spectacular with their leaf shapes. I wouldn't count on all of them being deer resistant, but many are. You just have to read your labels. And another thing about reading the labels, I just can't emphasize that enough. However, some of the nurseries don't really have very informative labels. So I take my phone and I look at the label, but I look it up and I try and get a little bit more information if the label doesn't help me. People who are interested in the native plants, we do have some options for you for shade: Trillium, Pacific Iris, Carpentaria, or Bush Anemone, and many different ribes. We can even grow some vegetables for shade. In fact, some prefer shade and do much better. Leafy greens, your lettuce, kale, and chard. Some of your root crops will do well. Many of these vegetables they start in the early spring before your trees have leafed out, so you can use that to your advantage to select your vegetables to plant. Container gardening is lots of fun. The containers allow for hanging plants, which are nice draping over. I like the containers, particularly for plants I'm not sure about the lighting. I can move them around until I see what works for them. You can control the soil, and the water needs a little bit better, but they do need to be watered a little bit more. And they also need to have potting soil, not topsoil. They all need good drainage, so that's very important to allow for that. You can also start with even a tree like Japanese maple. Did I mention I could talk about Japanese maples? And you can fill in with annuals for color. So much creativity can be demonstrated with container gardenings, or not, as the case may be. These are just some examples of some of the container plants that were selected for shade. You can see the cast iron plant in the top one. There's some ferns. I'm not quite sure, maybe some Boston ivy in the front. Again, the coral bells, there's some impatiens, some ferns in the one on the lower right. You can see just in those two plants, two pictures, just how many different plant choices you have. Again, I wanted to emphasize it and support your ideas about you being creative with your shade, and that you can do so much with the shade, with the containers. And we hope that we presented a few of your design principles to help you be successful. And again, I must emphasize that when you make a mistake, it becomes compost. So please, just don't be afraid to try something and make mistakes. And I'll turn it over now to our moderators to answer any questions that have been answered. Thank you for your attention.
Not launching, so we will go ahead with questions and answers. And first couple things is just to remind everyone that there is a link to the resources and the handouts that both Allison and Susan referenced, and that link is on our website, so be sure and go and get that. And then kind of a fun comment was someone really enjoyed the image of hand watering with a glass of wine. Yes, so now on to a couple questions. So there's a question about speaking to soil preparation for plant choices when you're planting under an established old dogwood tree. Do you, off the top of your head, do you have some recommendations on that?
Well, first of all, I would do a soil test to see what type of soil you have there. Dogwoods are fairly, they're fairly tolerant and shouldn't have any problem with almost anything you want to plant, assuming the sun is right. Now, remember, dogwoods are deciduous, so you're going to lose the leaves. So you're going to have some pretty bright sun in the spring, and you have to select your plants accordingly.
Yeah,
Is that
under
answering it?
under my dogwood tree, which is still pretty little, I've massed some Lenten roses or heliobores. They seem to do quite well, and they're a little higher, and so they kind of hide the trunk a little bit. But I've had really good luck with those around my dogwood.
And don't forget your coral bells. When you go to the nursery, you just so many different color choices of coral bells. And they do have a bit of a flower, which is not terribly impressive, but the leaf color is what you're really buying. And they will maintain that leaf color throughout the season. So it maintains a good seasonal color choice for you.
Great, thank you. And then another question is, what about bulbs for shade? What bulbs?
Sorry. Daffodils will do fine. Great muscari. Well, those are two that come to mind. Pacific iris tolerate quite a lot of shade too. I have a lot of that personally. Those are some of the choices just off the top of my head that I can think of. But again, most of I even have some iris blooming in a shaded area. Many of the bulbs won't do quite as well with limited shade, but they will grow.
Great, thank you.
Any other ideas for you, Allison?
And then I think there was a comment they really appreciated how you talked about adding color with the different foliage leaves that can add a lot of interest to the garden. And then another question on what are some of the plants for low maintenance in the shade, or the plants are low maintenance, shade plants that are low maintenance. I think I got that.
No, I think I've tried to point out a few of those throughout the talk, but to consolidate some of those issues for low maintenance, I like Sarcoca, I like Daphne, I like ferns. Coral bells really are pretty disease intolerant. Hostas take a little bit more work in my mind, but they really add so much nice color. Those are some of my suggestions. Anything else you can think of, Allison?
Yeah, I love Japanese forest grass. Easy,
That's
easy,
another
easy.
one.
Okay. And another question that just came in is how to maintain, since you're going to love this one, Susan, how to maintain the beautiful mounding shape of my Japanese maple as the years go by.
It does it on its own, pretty much. You have to select your Japanese maples carefully. Many will not grow more than a mounding or only have a vase shape. Oh, I did mention I could talk a lot more about this, didn't I?
Yes.
So if you look at some of the pictures of the Japanese maples, some typically are going to grow more upright. Some will grow upright with kind of a sprawling. I think the first thing to consider is look at the shape that you want. And there are many nurseries, particularly, I don't really like to name one in particular, High Hand Lakes Nursery. They have a really nice selection of Japanese maples that can help you with your selection. But you need to select the variety that typically will grow in a mounded form first. Then you don't have to prune it.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
I think it does. And I think it kind of goes back to, like you said, it's in a way, it's like reading the label before you pick it. And
exactly.
Maybe this person has a vision, but that's not the vision of the plant, of the Japanese maple itself. Maybe.
Well, then ask your nurseryman to help you with that.
Okay.
Just as an example, I went to a nursery one time with an idea of a cultivar that I wanted, and the one they had by that cultivar name was too big to get in my car. And so I said, oh gosh, I came all this way. What else can I do? You have anything else? Well, he pointed out a smaller specimen. He said, this is very similar to the one that you wanted and will fit in your car. So yes, again, a little technical difficulties with the choices, but
yeah.
I had to do what I had to do there. So don't hesitate to ask for help and get them to help make a few suggestions for you.
Great, great. And
I have a little
Go ahead.
comment about
Mhm.
Japanese maples. I planted one in my patio area, and I really didn't have a very large spot. I made a mistake and bought a Japanese maple that was just gorgeous, beautiful. But every year I had to climb that tree to prune it.
Climb it?
So you have to make sure that you read the labels carefully. When they say goes up to 25 feet, they mean it. And if your spot is not going to tolerate that, every year you're going to have to do major pruning, which is fine, but it's a lot more work than I wanted to give at that time.
I have another tip that I learned at a flower show a couple of years ago. I had a kind of a waterfall feature, and I had a mounding plant that kind of fell over the waterfall. It looked lovely, but I wanted it a little bigger. So what they had told me at the flower show is that you pick a branch, you pull it up in a more upright position and stake it. That becomes your leader, what we call, because trees grow in a linear fashion. The trunk doesn't grow up, it grows up from the top. So you just take a close branch to the top that looks pretty sturdy, prop it up a little bit, and the tree will kind of grow up and mound a little higher. And so I got a mounding look, but I got it higher to cover the space that I wanted. So that's just a little tidbit to share with you.
Great. Okay, now we've got another question here. It's on going a little different direction. When is the best time to prune very old and leggy rhodies? Any information on that off the top of your heads?
I'm not the person to ask because I just killed 3 this year because I have way too much sun. But I've always made sure that I took off the flowers as soon as they faded. You crimp them back. If you don't do that, you get really leggy plants. You know, I'm a person that if I see a branch that doesn't look right, I take it off immediately. I don't wait to a specific season. So I kind of walk the garden and prune as I go. I don't take a lot off, but I take a little off more often. How about you, Susan?
Well, remember, when you're pruning, it's not like getting a haircut. I mean, you know, if you get a bad haircut, it will grow out. Not so with pruning. So you do have to be careful. Obviously, pruning your dead, any branches that cross over. To my knowledge, it shouldn't make any difference, particularly when you prune it, other than you don't want to prune the blooming ones. Now, one exception to that are hydrangeas, and it depends on the variety of hydrangeas, when you prune and what you prune. But most other plants, I think you can pretty much, you know, as Allison said, if it doesn't look right, chop it off and it will sprout out. Now, remember, when you cut off a branch, it's going to sprout out from the sides and get bushier generally. So you need to think about that when you're cutting it.
Okay, thank you.